really wanted to hear Daniel speak. So I don't think Daniel needs an introduction. Obviously, you're all coming here to see him. He is one of the most gifted artists that I've ever seen, and certainly to hear him talk about how he approaches his art, because I've been in a couple of classes where he's done that, is fascinating. The other thing is, I'm buying a piece of Daniel's art and going to donate it back to the center. That's not why I'm saying that.
But it's nice.
I haven't decided fully yet what piece I'm going to buy. So as you guys go afterwards and look at the art, I'm going to be asking you guys which ones speak to you.
Three-dimensional one.
What?
The three-dimensional one.
Okay, well, that's what speaks to you. So I want to hear from other people also. So Daniel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
Great,
doing
thank
this.
you, Margie. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Margie Schutstack and Maritza Silva for inviting me to do this, to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of RSS. I wasn't completely certain what was happening. I would have brought some visuals, but I'm happy to just give a little overview of my story. I was born in the northeast corner of the Bronx, Boston Road, Eastchester Road, heading towards Co-op City, sort of like the great outskirts of town, and I lived in a second-story apartment of a four-story building, looking out on another second-story apartment, and not much of a view. So when I was 9 years old and the neighborhood started to get iffy and my mother found syringes up on the roof, it was time to skedaddle. And my brother was in John Philip Sousa Junior High School, and he was starting to have trouble with gangs or whatever. And so my father somehow, well, because we lived in hillside homes, which was sort of created in, as after World War II, there was a big shortage of like middle income housing in the city, and the housing project I grew up in, it was called Hillside Homes, was 5 square blocks of these beautifully organized 4-story buildings with courtyards and all kinds of community spaces. And it was built in the early 30s, but by the mid-60s, things were changing. But my father somehow was aware of the Michelama program that had just gotten going with these high-rises around the Bronx and parts of the city, and so we wound up moving here to Kingsbridge, to Cannon Heights in Kingsbridge. I actually happen to still live in the apartment I moved into with my parents when I was 9 years old. Whatever dubious distinction that gives me, I don't know. But it is a treasure to live in such a building and have that kind of reduced rent and decent, as we all know, it's challenging in the city. But the thing was, we moved to this apartment. First, it was on a hill. Not only did my parents have this vision and found this Michelama building, which took extra number of years because they hit water when they were building. It was like a whole fiasco. But anyway, finally moved in. But they also managed to get an apartment that had this like unbelievable view. So we're up on the hill, so you have so Broadway, then the Major Deegan and Bailey Avenue, then there's the hill, and then you go up Bailey Place, and we're on Fort Independence Street, that's where I live. And then the building, so we're on a hill, and then we're on the 9th floor, and we look west, and we see the sunsets, and the vista of Riverdale, and and that was an awesome thing, that that view that triggered something. So I had done one painting before moving that my parents, so they had raised 5 children. I was the youngest by 9 years. My oldest sibling was 18 years older than me, so they had grown up in a different generation, or 40s, different attitude. My father's strictness, whatever, kind of, worked its way through his system. And he had my 2 oldest brothers were like overachievers or whatever, so that really fulfilled my parents' need for conventionally successful children. So one was a physicist, one was an engineer, you know the story, so, I mean, Jewish household, whatever. And then the times were changing, obviously, and we're getting into the 60s. I'm, sort of starting to, come of age at a time when the world is changing in some really interesting ways. And my siblings would tell my parents, leave him alone, let him do what he wants to do. And happily they paid attention to that. So they knowing that we were going to be moving from this other apartment, they let me do a mural on my wall of our bedroom. I told this story last week at the Kingsbridge Historical Society. I'd shared my bedroom with my youngest brother, who was 9 years older than me. So we had 2 beds coming out from the wall. On the wall, I painted my cityscape, my first cityscape. And I remember asking my brother, like, how do you do a window? And so he said, oh, you make an L. So I made all these L's, lots of L's, and all of the ingredients I put in. I had a tree with a squirrel on it, a guy walking a dog. I wish we had a picture of it, we do not, but I have a vision of it. But it was like with the skyscrapers and everything. And my friends and I would hop on the beds. We were 8 years old, and put towels on our shoulders and leap from bed to bed, pretending we were Superman. So that was what leading up, and then I moved to. I should have visuals, but I don't. But leading to moving to this apartment with this astonishing view, and over the years. That was kind of my, just kind of infiltrated because you weren't so high up that you were above everything. We were kind of in the middle range, so you could, you had the tops of the roofs of the building across the street, and then, everything that spread out, and the big sky above. And when I was 15, I did my first serious cityscape of this scene, which was done in magic marker, which was one of my favorite materials at the time. And because I used to have these blank books with black covers, and so I did most of my artwork in those books. I always challenged, like every page was a different, like water mixed with marker, mixed with ink, mixed with whatever, always experimenting. And the youngest brother, Eddie, went to music and art high school. He was sort of heading in a art direction. He kind of wound up switching into architecture, and he worked for Buckminster Fuller and did all kinds of nifty stuff, but so I would see the drawings that he would bring home, and in those days, thanks to Albert Schenker, there were a lot of school strikes, which was my favorite thing in the world, and so I went to school with my brother. He would take me with him to Cooper Union, to Music and Art, wherever, and so I had a lot of exposure to like a community of what I considered, real artists or whatever, musicians. And so when I wound up dropping out of high school, going to India when I was 16, hitchhiking across the country, I got my GED like a year before I was supposed to have graduated, so all my friends were sitting in their classes in high school, and I was running around with a high school diploma. And that enabled me to like having my high school diploma allowed me to take all these civil service tests. I worked in the World Trade Center for Social Security, and then I got the big job at the Bronx General Post Office when I was 18. Luckily, this same brother who was now living with a group of people, 9 people altogether, in a big house outside of Boston, that my brother and his friend Alan came to visit me one morning, because I was working the night shift, the graveyard shift, and had mercy. They saw my eyes sort of rolling around in my head. It wasn't a high point in my stories, but so they kind of liberated me and brought me to live with them. And the first big painting I did in Boston, excuse me, sorry, that's him, call him.
That's a good one.
First big painting was based on that magic marker piece. I worked on it for a couple of years. I got a call, so I was taking what do you do? I'm young guy living with a bunch of people. It's very inexpensive, but I got time on my hands. So my brother just had he had a 3-month-old son, so I wound up running the daycare program from 3 months to 3 years. I worked with a core group of little creatures, but then everybody's like, take classes, so I studied whatever I could come up with. So I took classes in conga drum lessons. I took Tai Chi lessons. I took Chinese and Japanese brush painting classes. And then I was taking a night class at the museum school of the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston, very prestigious art school that had an evening program, and everybody said I should study with this Japanese teacher called Kajiaso, and I did, and he was extraordinary. One night I got a call from my father saying that he had just gotten Social Security and Social Security disability, and he said, I've been reading the small print and it says if I have any children under the age of 21, the government will pay for their college tuition. I'm like, great, why should I pay to take one night class with this guy when I can study full-time for free during the day? So I applied and was accepted so I did a year at the museum school, and studied with Kajiaso amongst others. Unfortunately, they had some of their more advanced teachers, you had to take a test to get into their class. So they come in and paint a model. Well, I had never painted a model, so that was kind of unfortunate that I wasn't I didn't get into some of the more advanced classes, but what was great was the art history class. You would study a particular artist, then you'd walk across the streets of the museum and see the real work, which was extraordinary. Anyway, I was working on this big cityscape based on the magic marker piece, and then it was cold in Boston. You laugh, it's the windiest city in the country. Chicago is not, Boston is the windiest city. And I happened that those couple of years, those couple of winters were when they had the big blizzards and they had to like fly in these giant bulldozers to clear the snow. They had people skiing down Mass Ave. You'd see the antennas of the cars coming up from the snow. And so I put up a sign because I was playing conga, and I put up a sign saying any artists here who wanted to play music together. And this one wonderful fellow named Mijo answered, a violinist. And he was from New Orleans, and he convinced me over a period of time that that would be the place for me. I should go into the French Quarter and be one of these itinerant, whatever the word is, painter, and I could make, a living doing that. So that was my plan. Unfortunately, never came to be. Mijo wound up dying of AIDS, as was the time. And I didn't know what to do, so I came back to the Bronx. So now I'm 24. I've had 1 year of college. I'm not sure which way I'm going. I'm back in the same apartment with the view. And I hadn't finished that painting, so now I'm finishing it from life again. And what do I do? So people had the same advice, go back to school. So I applied to the School of Visual Arts and got a full scholarship. And they put me in the first year program, freshman, because I didn't, really think about it, so they threw me in. But the first day of class, the teachers are saying, yellow and red make orange, and I'm like, I think, I'm not in the right situation. So I went to my advisor and I said, this is how I feel. I'm too advanced for this program, this first year program. And he said, well, what have you done that could get you credit? So I said, well, I went to the museum school in Boston, but because I knew I wasn't gonna be, it's a very expensive school, so I knew after I turned 21, they weren't gonna be covering my tuition anymore. I didn't bother to go to the review boards that that you do at the end of the year. I mean, I was a seasoned dropout by this point. So it was like, I'm not gonna bother with this. If there's a system, I'm running the other way. So, but he's like, well, I'll help you. Let's call them up. And, and sure enough, they said, oh, sure, come, have them come back next week and we'll have a makeup review board. So I needed for that, like for all the classes, I had taken photography, printmaking, art history, all kinds of stuff. And I was scrambling, hitting up everybody I knew. You got any photographs? You got any papers that you wrote or whatever? I just brought a bag full of stuff. I mean, the teachers that I met with, did they remember me from 4 or 5 years earlier? I don't know. They didn't know. And so sure enough, I came back the second week with 30 credits. And
Wow.
they threw me into the second year program. So then, of course, it's the Reagan era. They cut out scholarships. Cut my scholarship. Second year was half. Third year, no scholarship. I was doing the work study thing. I was, trying to take out loans and all that kind of garbage. And then, fourth year, I'm like, I was telling my friend Alan, I had every excuse to not finish this program. I had dropped out of Hebrew school, I had dropped out of high school, I had dropped out of college, now I'm gonna drop out again. That's what I do. So, and he's like, no, you have to stay in school. And I'm like, well, why? And he said, because you need to finish something. And I couldn't argue with that. And sure enough, that year, my my final year, 1984, final year, senior year, was the best because I had finished all my requirements and I had, they gave you your own like studio, and so you were hanging out with, with everybody, and by having the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, that allowed me to teach. And so fast forward, so that was 1984. 1988, I had a solo show at the Bronx Museum. Well, okay, wait, here's a better story. So I don't know, I could drone on forever, but you stop me when I've gone too far, but yeah, you poke me. Here's the best story. Okay, let me regroup my brain so I know what I'm talking about. I was gonna talk about, teaching. All right, I'll have to come back to it, but I lost the best story. So, I know as soon as I tell the other story, it'll come back to me. So, 1988, here it is. So my father had a push cart on the Lower East Side. His father's push cart, all the sons worked for him. And he was like a straight, business, whatever, hustler kind of guy. So he says to me when I'm 15 years old, he says to me, "You want to be an artist? Let's make some calls. I'll call the Metropolitan Museum. I'll call the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, the Guggenheim." So he did. He said, call these people. I don't know who he spoke to, got through to a couple of people, said, "My son's a great artist. You got to see his work." Sure enough, somebody at the Guggenheim, it turns out it was an archivist, said, "Sure, come and send them in." So I'll take a look. So this guy looked at my work and said, I love what you're doing, come back in 5 years. So now I'm 20 years old, I go back, he's still there.
Wow.
I show him my work, he's like, "This is fabulous, don't let anybody sway you to go this way, that way, do your own thing, keep it up, come back in 5 years." So I came back in 5 years. Now I'm 25, now I graduated college, he's like, "Oh, you're doing cityscapes?" He's like, "We just had one of our curators from the Guggenheim, he's gonna be the new director of the new Bronx Museum. Give him a call, tell him I gave you his number." So here it is, how many years, 10 years after my father made this call, I called the director of the Bronx Museum of what was gonna be, it was a synagogue. First it was, the Bronx
Right, it was a
Museum.
synagogue, that's
Bronx,
right.
Bronx Museum was in the Bronx County Courthouse, I don't know if anybody ever saw what because they really didn't do much there. Then they acquired the synagogue on 161st Street in the Concourse, and
64th.
64th Street.
Because I lived there, that's
Yeah, what did I say?
61st, which
No,
is the
you're
courthouse.
no, I didn't mean 60.
No worries.
I didn't mean 161st. 164th Street, thank you, Alicia. And so I called up Philip Ferry, and he said, "Oh, I'm going tomorrow to tour the synagogue to take a look at what we're gonna do. Why don't you come with me?" So I met him, and he's like, "This is where the big gallery's gonna be, this is where this and that gonna be." I'm like, "This is cool." And sure enough, his curator that he hired, Holly Block, who later became the director of the Bronx Museum for many years, was the curated, I got a call from her. And she said, "We're gonna give you a show." So from my father's, phone call, that just goes to show, you gotta kind of have a just chutzpah, I guess is the word, I don't know. Anyway, so I had this show at the Bronx Museum, and then my friend Ricky, who was teaching at a new alternative public high school called Bronx Regional on 164th Street in the Bronx, but on in Prospect Avenue, brought her students, a tricky bunch of characters, but you know, I just walked them through they were all paintings of the Bronx that they could relate to, and she called me the next day and said, you know, they really responded well, and they don't really respond to anything. So you know, if you want, maybe if you come to the school, we could pay you something. I said, oh, I like the sound of that. So I did, and I met the principal, and he's like, well, we can't pay you unless you have your teaching license. I'm like, okay, what do I gotta do? Oh, we gotta, you know, make an appointment, go to Brooklyn. So I did, went to Brooklyn. You know, as you can see, my life is just like, it has always kind of meandered along in bizarre ways. So I went to Brooklyn, you know, took the 3-hour test. I don't know, how many of you have been teachers? Yeah, so everybody knows what I'm talking about. Fingerprinted, blah, blah, blah. I went back to the principal and said, you gotta hire me for more than just one presentation for what I just went through. So he hired me as a regular part-time art teacher. I was there for 6 years. And that was the beginning. Since then, so now you know I've taught daycare. Now I've taught, so that was so, you know, the giant like factory schools weren't working, so they started to break up the big buildings into these satellite schools. So our building had, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 different schools in it. But ours was for maybe we had, 300 students, 350 students, but so we had a literacy program. These were high school kids who couldn't read or write for some reason. Some of them were remanded by the prison system that said if you finish high school or you stay in jail or whatever. Some of them were just like weren't working and were thrown out of their current schools. Then we had a daycare program for the population that had children downstairs. It was quite a curious bunch. And the thing that highlight of that experience was I did a couple of portraits of my students, which I gave to them one year, and the word went out. And over the last 4 years or so, I did 75 portraits of my students, which I gave to at the end of the year when and some of those are in the New York Historical Society, actually. But the ones that the kids like didn't come back to pick up or whatever, because I gave them all away, but I got good at portraiture because I would have, so there was one day I did 7 portraits back to back in 40, we had the 45-minute period, you know, and you had to make it happen in that stretch. Sometimes it was a second session, but since then I taught 16 years in the architecture department at City College, basic drawing with architecture, graduate, undergraduate. I've been at the Y for more than 30 years. You know, now I'm here. I've arrived. RSS. High Point. But I've taught, you know, basically I taught at PS 81. I taught everywhere, but always part-time, always what I want to teach, the way I want to teach it, which is very fortunate, as all you teachers know. I so admire and can't believe what teachers do had one, full-time teachers, one class after the other. It's astonishing. I don't know how anybody does it. And career-wise, I've always managed my own thing. I've described my career as a sort of alternative career as well. I've, never been in the stable of a gallery. I mean, I've had more than 40 solo shows, but including this new show, I haven't really gotten a chance to see it. What's hanging here is, Maritza said we need 15 pieces, so I looked through the racks and saw what was ready to hang and looked, reasonable, and figured to kind of mix it up. So that's what we have here. So please, have a nice, questions.
Yeah, is the work that you have in the library of the Bronx Community College, is that a permanent setting? Because I saw
Oh,
it.
thank
but I
you,
don't
yeah,
know
thanks
if
for mentioning that. So along the way, well, I should mention some of so okay, so 2007, 6, 2005 maybe, I got the MTA commission. I did the Freeman Street Station, it's glass, commission of glass work, glass versions of my work. As soon as I finished that, I got this commission at Bronx Community College, 22 paintings permanently installed in the new Robert A.M. Stern Library. As soon as I finished that, I told my wife, well, it's enough for these big project. And what did we wind up doing? We spearheaded the Bronx Artist Documentary Project, where we engaged 30 Bronx-based photographers and photojournalists to photograph, to document 82 artists, Bronx artists at work, doing whatever they do, everybody from easel painters like myself to street artists, graffiti people, and everything in between. We had 9 public events, 6 exhibits, a book and a film, all in this kind of service of trying to fill this gap that we have in the Bronx. Being an artist in the community, doing my thing for a whole lifetime, and yet I met very few other artists because we don't have a cultural center. Unless anybody can name one, I don't know. We don't have a downtown in the Bronx. And we have all these disparate neighborhoods that have very different qualities. And there's not a lot of cross communication, and there was not a lot of communication between the different kinds of artists in the Bronx. So we set about in a 3-year odyssey to create to do a program that would serve to bring people together, and I think we were pretty successful in our way. We partnered with the Bronx Documentary Center, which is a great organization on 151st Street and Cortlandt Avenue, and with the Bronx Council on the Arts and the Bronx Museum and all other Bronx institutions, basically. Artists in the community, being out on the street, which is primarily where I had been for many decades, doing, such things as this. I had 6 exhibits, solo shows in Europe and Germany and Austria, taught most places that I've gone. I've done art residencies in Andalusia, in Costa Rica, in Germany, in Austria. Yes.
When do you paint?
When? You mean with all this? It sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of space in between. I mean, luckily, like I said, keep the low overhead, no full-time jobs. So I paint whenever I'm not doing everything else, which is as much as I possibly can. And everybody's invited whenever, you get the inclination. My studio's on 247th Street, right on the other side of Henry Hudson Parkway. You're welcome to give a call and visit. I've always loved having people come see what I'm doing. I finally did the kind of ultimate cityscape, the view, of course, from my terrace, but it's in 10 panels. It's 21 feet long, by 7 feet high, and it resides in my studio at the moment. The larger you work, the more challenging it is to find homes or even places to exhibit. Although when I sent out the notice about this, I got a response from somebody from the Hudson River Museum, who I've been trying to get to come. Yeah, but I've been working it way. But my thing is like, it's gotta be a personal. I'm not, so now, like a lot of artists, our careers are all through social media or whatever. But that's a kind of a disconnect for me. Yes.
I'm fascinated by your father. Sorry about your father. Can you talk more about how he influenced you? Because he seems so supportive of all your.
He was, out of space and time, being from his world, his generation. He was, he was one of 5 brothers and a sister, and they were, grew up on Henry Street, and, being the first, the parents come from the Austro-Hungarian Empire or whatever, and his father had this push cart, and all the sons worked for him. None of them, only the oldest finished high school. And then, when LaGuardia ended push carts in New York 80-something years ago, my father, his father, they were Jewish, but he made extra money by going out of the Lower East Side on the weekends, on a Saturday, and going to Hell's Kitchen or other areas. And so some of, to replace, to give, a location for all these displaced pushcart people, there were these indoor markets created around the city. We still have the one on Arthur Avenue, which is way cool. I got to paint in the market for a month, and got a feel, I realized, like, why am I so happy here? Because it was in my blood or whatever. My father and my uncles all had worked in such an environment. So my father wound up sharing a shop in Hell's Kitchen for a number of years. And his oldest brother was the only one who had a higher education, started a mail order electronic gadget business on Allerton Avenue, and all the brothers worked for him. So the story of him getting Social Security disability was because my uncle never gave them a pension. The business finally folded. My father was in his, late 60s, and he tried to go back and work at fruit places, which didn't work out. So he kind of, found a way to collect, and thus I started my college career. But so when I was at the school, the Music and Art, LaGuardia, in its old location on 137th Street, my teachers would send home notes like, he's not paying attention, he's like, he's whatever, he's not showing up. And my father wrote, I still have this, he wrote on the thing, why don't you teach him him what he wanted to learn.
Oh,
So that's the
Pretty
kind,
clever.
and when they, I had been grooming them for the fact that I probably wasn't gonna finish high school from like 5th grade. So my parents, to ward off the possibility of a truant officer showing up, they actually took me to a high school in South Jersey where my sister was, and had me like quote, sign up as a student there to send all the, the powers that be off the track or whatever. And then they put me on a plane at age 16 to India to meet with my brother, the same brother who just called, who was traveling around the world with his fiance. Yeah, Carl.
Yeah, very
So the question is, what happened? So how did I get the Bronx Community College commission? I got a call from Jennifer McGregor, who at the time was the curator at the Glinder Gallery at Wave Hill. I don't think I had met her before, so she called and said, she was the liaison, she was the person hired to work between the school and, the committee and the artists. And so she said, we want you to apply for this thing. I said, oh, great, how did you know about me? Oh, we know about you. Oh, all right, so I'm glad you asked that, because there's another good story. I applied, which means when you apply to such a thing, it means you just submit the work that you've done in the past, basically, in a little resume. So I did. A couple of weeks later, I get another call, you're one of the finalists. Cool. So I'm a finalist. So I show up, there's 4 of us. And they have a presentation by the architects of this building that hasn't even begun to be built yet. And we've seen images of the projected interior spaces, and they are sending us home with these images, and we have to decide individually where our art would go and what that art would be. And then they pay you to come up with a proposal. Maybe you had 2 months to flesh it out. So, but at that first meeting, I asked if oil paintings would be appropriate, and they said no. They said it's too fragile. So I'm like, oh, okay. So luckily, because I had done the MTA commission, I had worked with fabricators, and I knew that they were like mosaic. I asked them what material should I think about working in, and they said, well, mosaic would be good if you could, have a mosaic done of your work. That could be the art. Okay, so I made some calls to fabricators, and I sent parts of my images to them, one in Montreal, there's a chair over here if you want, one in Munich, and by the time I gave my presentation, which was in the Gould Memorial Library, the beautiful dome building, what's his name, White, Stanford White building. But by the time, I thought I was slick, I had they had done these fabrications of these little panel sections, and I had these mosaics to show to the committee. So the committee's made up of the head of the art department of the school, the people from the administration of the school, the DASNY, which is the Dormitory Association State of New York, responsible for all capital construction projects on all the state colleges. and the architects. So there's the committee, it's dark in the room, I'm in the middle of my presentation, showing, thinking I'm slick, showing my little mosaics, and I hear somebody in the audience say, "Would you consider painting instead?" So in a nanosecond, I came out with, "Well, I'm a painter." And that's how that was there, is everybody chuckled. And sure enough, when I came to understand that that was somebody from the architect's office, who was like, maybe Robert A.M. Stern said, let the guy paint, See, so if we're gonna bring him in, he's a painter, and because when I called the fabricator, the mosaic people, and I said, what we were hoping to do, they said, "Okay, what's your budget?" I told them, and they said, "Oh, great, we'll make sure you keep 15% of it, and we'll take the rest." And that's what happens, artists, once they, these public art projects, once, an artist, starts to, get involved with that world, they become a contractor, basically. You farm the work out. Maybe you got somebody who's hustling to get the gigs, then you're just like you're just a contractor. Here's the image, you hand it over to the fabricator. I even visited, I got an invitation to visit the fabricator in Munich. And when I said, to the people who actually make the tile work, I said, how much do the artists stay involved in this process? And we're like, we encourage them to back off, They don't really want you involved, once the fabricators take over. But then, as you can imagine, and which is the case in most situations, is the work itself becomes somewhat compromised or diluted. It's hard for an artist to, maintain quality control. The bigger the commission or the more that's at stake, and the less, the artist just plays this other kind of role. Anyway, somebody else had a question? Yes?
Do you take photographs of the area that you wanna paint, and as a reference?
Well, I see you sketching there, and, I made a rule for myself pretty early on that I didn't want to be dependent on photography, and, that's pretty much been my way to work on location. I mean, I'm working right now from my imagination, which is a whole nother story, but I would say at the beginning, I used photography because I needed to learn how to control paint, and I was trying to make hard edges, and how do you do that? What kind of brushes, what kind of consistency of paint, and how do you make all of that? But once I got past that, so when I first started drawing on location, I had this attitude that I was gonna only be, completely, I'm not gonna editorialize at all. I'm just gonna paint what I see, what's out there, not gonna throw any ideas or styles or anything into it. Of course, I find myself painting someplace, and I'm like, you know what? Well, I mean, how come why did I paint the shadows going this way? The shadows are going that way. Well, I started the thing 5 hours ago, and the shadows are going another way. I had to make a choice. Well, guess what? A car went by, I sketched that in, I had to make another choice. The light is changing. And then, I realized and this is what I work with. I'm working with my drawing class. We're not here to replicate exactly what we see. We're using the world for it as a reference. And, I learned how to compose you know, and had to take all these liberties, you know, and, you know, if at some point, you know, in this, I needed a reference for a dog lying under a table or something, I could use a photograph as, you know, to pop them in for different details. You know, you know, we have to work according to our own sensibilities, but for me, I mean, when you look at, you know, the work of, I mean, of course, there were the photorealists, but I mean, their work was never the most deeply felt on my part. You know, when you see artists who, you know, or copying photographs, it's very limited. And when you're out on a location, it's unlimited, and you're absorbing sound and smell and conversation and, you know, everything, and you're there when that magic light happens for a split second, and if you happen to be tuned into it, you can pop it in, and that's, you know, it's a magical process, and it's not gonna happen from a photograph as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Any other questions? So enjoy the show. Yes.
Is that the corner of Jerome and Fordham?
No,
It could be
Jerome
many
and
places.
Marshalloux.
Marshalloux, okay.
Marshalloux, yes, the Marshalloux
Marshalloux.
I
station.
feel like I could cross the
I-
street.
I know, it's
That's such a
big.
great
I
perspective.
did a whole,
Yeah, this is so
I
beautiful.
did a whole thing, I did a whole series
This is gonna
of
show
these.
Marshall.
I did a whole series of that area. What happens sometimes with my, as when I bring the work back to the studio, if I wind up continuing to work on it, sometimes they get like, you know, I start to build up the surface so you can, you know, see the kind of texture. You know, and sometimes I play around. Some of them linger on the racks of my studio for too long, and then I wind up reworking them and, you know, trying to
Was
bring
the
new life.
decoration as classic? Because the outline of the station.
Yeah,
Some morning time.
you know, the tiles inside,
Yeah.
interesting windows. It
Cause they didn't,
makes it special.
like the pilots, they just do it anymore.
What else with it? Yeah, well, yeah. It's a little-
Red, no.
That guy hanging out.
This-
Front seating that you have of your grandmother, that's.
Oh, yeah, okay, so but this is my mother's mother, Bubby.
But they wouldn't let us do that. They get to watch it.
Who
this
I
person will be a safe
knew in my lifetime. She was
sit
all,
back or hit them out so when they all said it done. You want sit
taller than she was from Mint. And she, you know, so she lived with us for 11 years. Am I talking too long?
I'm gonna give you 2-minute warning.
All right, 2 minutes. No, it's good to end on a Bubby note. So she would drive my father crazy because she could not stand anything that could be thrown out that could be of any value. So, you know, my father would just like go crazy, like Bubby be going through the garbage. And, I mean, she came over when she was 17 by herself from Minsk. Anyway, she started going to a senior program, Bronx House on Pelham Parkway, when she was in her mid-70s. And she was, you know, hopping around the different classes that they had. And she saw that in the art class, at the end of the class, people were throwing away paint. And she started collecting this paint and making paintings of with the paint, because she couldn't stand that the paint would be wasted. So and she was very freestyle. And so in that piece there, the one of Bubby, you have the couple of things she brought with her, the little mini samovar, these little wooden figurines of the people from the shtetl or whatever. But then the designs were based on her, like, kind of paint drawings and paintings, and we did some collaborative pieces together. I tried to get a show when I was at Visual Arts of the Bubby show, but it was too radical. It was too radical for the school. It was too avant-garde, unfortunately, because yes, she did this marvelous work. So that was an homage, and that hung in her daughter, my Aunt Lily's house for like, I don't know, 25 years.
So some of it is yours and some of it is hers?
So I did the whole thing, pastel, but it is a representation of her incorporating
And
her
your Bubby's in the
design.
corner.
And Bubby's in the corner. All right, I got the signal, so thank you. I'm gonna give you my card. Just call me, call me on the cell or text or whatever, and we'll make it. I don't need images.